Hey, welcome back everyone. Rob here from Ram Studio Comics. So in today's video, I'll be drawing Ryan Reynolds in more of a comic style. And I wanted to show you this technique because this is something that I practice, here and there, and I don't share as much of it on the channel, and I probably should. I did one of Audrey Hepburn a ways back. I drew her as Harley. You can reference that video. And I kind of talked about this. So I just thought it'd be due for another one. And let me know if you like these types of videos. I'll bring you more. But one of the reasons why I think this is such an important technique to introduce for comics is that it really gives you a lot more than just the particular reference of a single shot. So like with this one, I thought it was a good expression to work with, and just the haircut, everything I thought would be cool to draw. And so I'm learning from this particular shot, obviously, but what's really neat about this is, say I had a character in my comic or a comic I was going to draw for somebody else or whatever, and they resembled Ryan Reynolds, right? I would be able to use lots of reference. There's just a ton of reference because all the movies he's done. It's not just the images that you can find from various angles and expressions. It's thumbing through the actual movies and pausing a scene, getting an overhead shot, getting a fearful expression, an excited expression, whatever. You've got just tons and tons of resource material for a particular character like that. So even though they don't necessarily need to match the character in the comic verbatim or exactly, you can still pull from that and have just unlimited amount of resource material. I mean, think about somebody like Jack Nicholson and the amount of movies he did throughout the years, even the span of his life. Now, I wouldn't say to draw it exactly like somebody like Jack Nicholson or even like this. I'm not going to try to draw Ryan Reynolds exactly the way he looks, because then it's just going to come across like, oh, you're putting Ryan Reynolds in your comic, which, I don't know. I don't even think that's legal. But what I'm saying is, like, that's not really the goal here. The goal is to utilize his look and him as a structure, him as a sort of mannequin. That sounds a bit creepy, I guess, but lots of artists do it. Lots of comic artists do this, and you can change them. You can put different hairstyles, and you can change their features a bit even, but you can still use them as a base kind of representation of what you need, and it gives you a lot of great information. It's very, very valuable. I mean, you can even use yourself, people in your family, friends, whatever. I mean, that's a great way to do it. But again, it gives you a plethora of resource material that you otherwise would struggle to find. And I think that realistically, you need to even look at people that don't look just like your characters and use that as well, obviously. But this is more of a beginning tutorial for somebody that hasn't gotten to that level yet, where they can look through somebody and draw what they want as well. It's almost like a slow transition. So hopefully what you see here is that I'm not drawing him exactly the way he looks. I've got his eyes too big. I've got the mouth is shaped differently. Even the head shape is different. Now, the reason for that is because, again, I'm not trying to copy what I'm seeing so much as I'm trying to use it as a good source material to pull and harness from certain aspects of the artwork. In this case, the expression, where the wrinkles are, where the his hairstyle and beard. I thought that'd be cool to draw the same way. So I'm very much sticking pretty true to the source material, but I'm not drawing it exactly the way I would if I was trying to make a portrait of him. I'm thinking a little bit more like a caricature, but even that, I'm not exaggerating as much, almost nowhere near as much. So for American comics, I want something that looks a little heroic. It's got a little bit of exaggeration, but not too off the charts, goofy, silly with the skinny neck and little body. I'm not going for all that. But as I draw this, I am still using the same types of lines that I would use as I drew out of my mind for my own character. So again, that's my way to translate it into my own style, or part of that process. If I look at the source material and I try to draw the curves on his face exactly the way they are, then it's not really going to look like my art style, because I don't do that in my comics. You see what I mean? So I'm having to relate the information in a way that still matches my comic art, because if I pull from the source material, I draw it entirely different, and I start to think more in portrait mode, or I start to, try to capture every curve and bend in its organic nature, then all of a sudden it's going to look like a copy paste inside my comic, because it's not going to match the rest of the characters. So hopefully you realize that this is more of a way to translate, again, the source material into a comic art style. And it just takes a little bit of practice. At first, I think it's helpful to overly stylize and overly caricaturize. That's what I did for years when I did caricatures at parties. I would, do the real goofy faces, big eyes, big nose, whatever. And that was all fun and games, but it was there for the sake of caricaturing, so you could go a lot further with that. For comics, the type of comic that I draw anyways, it's not that far out there as far as proportions and exaggerations go. So, it's just kind of bringing that all together, culminating that together into your art style. So you can see it doesn't look really much like him. I mean, I think it resembles him, but it doesn't look too much like him. I was kind of almost thinking a little bit like if I was to draw Ryan Reynolds as, was it Tim Drake? Drake from Uncharted. I was thinking more of that. I kind of felt like even this shot resembled that character a little bit. It's funny too, because not to digress too much, but that movie came out and I thought, wow, what were the reasons for those casting choices? And I thought Ryan Reynolds would have been a better Drake than Holland, and that's my own opinion. You guys can tell me in the comments below if you think I'm just out of my mind. It was just somebody that came to mind, and I'm sure there's a few that would do better, but it is a mix, I think, of finding somebody that can act in a way that can portray the character, have fun with it. They have to have a variety of expertise, obviously. They can't just look like the character, so it's a mix. But I think overall, I think Ryan Reynolds would have pulled it off. But I haven't seen the movie yet, so maybe it's really well done, and I'm just, again, off my rocker here. It wouldn't be the first time. But that is what I was kind of thinking of as I was drawing this version of him. Like, what if I tried to stylize him in a way that looked a little bit more like that character? Not as square-jawed, squared off. I think that the character in the game, to me, looked very squared off, very, more chiseled, more, where Ryan Reynolds got a little bit more of a, longer, slender face. Not much, but it's just a little bit more like that. And I took that even further, honestly. So, again, it's not even a perfect match of those ideas, but I'm just trying to give you a bit of thought process into, what I was thinking as I was doing this. So now I'm just adding in the line weight. Again, I'm now at this stage of the work. I generally would get rid of the source material at this point, just so you know. Reason being is that's another way for me to translate the artwork into a comic style, or I'm sorry, the photo reference into a comic style without sticking too wholeheartedly to it. If it's always there in my face, then I'm going to keep glancing back naturally, and I'm going to keep pulling from it. But at this stage, I'm actually doing more of my line rendering the way that I would draw, again, my own comic style. So for me, it actually makes more sense to get rid of the source material so that I only think more wholeheartedly about the way that I do line work. In the same regards that I do my comic style, I try to use a bit more angles. I do, a bit more like jagged lines here and there, thick to thin, things like that. Just typical comic rendering. And you see even the wrinkles, I'm not drawing the wrinkles in the eyes exactly the way that his are. So yeah, all of this is just a effort to transform the reference into something else. But yeah, it's just basically the process I take, and I know it's a little bit slow going, but it's still a lot faster most of the time than trying to just draw out of my brain box. So it's efficient as well. Like, I think that, what did this take me? I think roughly over 15 minutes to draw a face, which is probably adequate. It's probably about what it takes me regardless. It probably takes me a little longer. This is the thing. When I go to draw just from my imagination, I'm probably going to need to warm up a couple times. I'm going to draw a couple faces that don't make the final cut. Where this one, I was able to just jump in and start drawing and pretty much get to an end result, something ready for inks in those 15 minutes. So in that regard, it's more efficient, it's faster. And again, I feel like this is something that isn't just, hey, what allows me to draw the character faster and get it done quicker. I mean, that's always a big deal. But I'm also learning. I'm learning about how to draw a face the way that it really looks, so that next time it'll be that much faster anyways. So again, that's got to be quantified into that part of that process, because it's not just learning to, draw things quicker. It's also learning to draw people in the way that makes sense. So if I draw from my imagination all the time, I see what happens. Like I like the rendering of what I draw generally, but I start to lose some of the expressiveness that it needs, the sense of life that it needs. So we have to always make time, in my opinion, to draw from life, because we'll lose that in our stylistic interpretation. And maybe not everybody, of course. Like I always say, it's not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. But for me personally, the less I draw from life, the more that I start to stiffen up, or I lose a sense of what makes a certain expression work. So yeah, I think it's very important to draw from life, and just, in a transformative way like we're doing here. Another thing to keep in mind is that you can also practice the same technique that I'm showing you here with less lines. So I'm going for more of a little bit what I would consider more of a rendered style, but you could definitely do the same exact thing with less lines. So generally less lines are going to look a little more cartoony, right? And that is also, it's also going to teach you a lot, because generally if you can make something look like the likeness or what you're after with less lines, then when you go to render over top, it's going to work equally as well, hopefully better. But again, it's a neat kind of practice for your mind to say, well, let me do one that's more rendered. All right, let me pull that back now and just grab the big strokes, the big shapes, and see how that looks. And again, that's what, cartooning, at least to me, that's what it's all about. Like it's making things work in a very simplistic way. And I always talk about, using the old Disney art styles for reference there. They do it really, really well. I mean, some of that stuff is just so beautifully done with just a few broad strokes, not so much texture and detail as far as the line work goes. Well, back when it was line work. But you can even see that they do the same thing with their 3D models to convey that sense of style that they go for. And it's clean and streamlined. Because that's one of the things to think about with things like expressions and emotion, that a lot of it can be carried through very simplified. And that's why it's easy to kind of lose that when you're going for comic style where it's more rendered, because if you don't get that basic underlying structure working the right way, it just kind of falls apart. So you can have this really cool rendered artwork that just doesn't have the right emotion to it and the right expression. Even here, it's like I wanted it to have the same expression that Ryan Reynolds is doing, but it's not the same expression. I lost that. I'm still okay with the look that I got from it, and I feel like I've learned through this process of drawing it here with you. But at the same time, I have to be honest with myself and anybody watching and say, okay, but I did lose that little, smirk expression that he's doing. I captured a look that I'm, happy with as far as something I would use in a comic, but it's not the exact expression. And so what does that mean? That means that I got to go back and I have to keep paying attention to this type of expression. Okay, it's close, but it's not there. What am I missing? Just things like that. And that's why this stuff is so important to practice time and time again, so that we can eventually zero in on what makes a certain expression or emotion come through on our characters. And basically, we're breathing life into the characters that we're creating for our comic and on the page. And that just generally doesn't happen the first couple tries. It takes time and perseverance and patience with yourself and revisiting the work. So at any rate, hopefully this has been informative for you and showed you a thing or two. Let me know what you think of the content in the comment section below, as well as what you'd like to see in the future. And if you don't mind, be sure to like, share, and subscribe so that we can keep this channel going. I really appreciate you tuning in and watching today's video. More content is on the way very soon. As always, keep drawing, keep having fun, and and bye for now.